Welcome back to another episode of My BrainWise Coach. I am Bastian, and I am joined by my co-host, Phil Dixon. We are so excited that you've joined us for another episode where we decode our lives through the understanding of neuroscience, and sometimes we sprinkle in a little behavioral science as well. And today we're going to have a really cool episode exploring things like risk tolerance, the ability to have curiosity, and many other fascinating subjects. Today we have a really special guest who is a close personal friend of Phil Dixon, and his name is Peter Johnson. And I'm not even going to attempt to explain his very long, extensive resume and the experience that he has, to include being a jokester. But I'm going to go ahead and introduce him first, and then we're going to dive in and really understand kind of Peter's journey. And the focus or the premise of the episode is going to be all around risk-taking. And then Phil and I will go through, of course, as we normally do throughout the episode, and understand what's happening from a behavioral or a neuroscience perspective and how you can apply that. But we're going to do that through the lens of Peter's story. So Peter, introduce yourself to our BrainWise friends, and thank you so much for joining us today. We're so excited to have you.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you, Cole. Hi, I'm Peter Johnson. Some of you may know that's the sort of name that they apply to an individual when they're in the witness protection program, but it's actually my real name. I am a general surgeon and a plastic surgeon by background, but about 30 years ago, I became an entrepreneur and was part of multiple companies before I retired a couple of years ago. And now I sit on a number of boards, equally balanced between academia, nonprofits, and for-profits. I have a wife of 40 years, a family with 3 children who are all grown and successful, and a full-fledged furniture making shop where my wife sends me every morning and tells me not to come out until 4:00 when the wine bottle gets opened.
Sounds like a wonderful time. I love it.
Except on Mondays when
I'm about the luckiest person I know, and I'm glad for it.
That's awesome. I love it. What a beautiful family. And congratulations on 40 years. That's huge.
Yeah.
Amazing.
For her, it's been 80.
I'm sure. I've only known you for a few weeks, but I can only imagine, Peter.
Yeah.
by the way, he thinks it's closer to a year.
Yeah.
Oh,
It's funny that we bring up this topic because Yogi Berra, the great Yankees catcher who was named MVP 3 times in his career, was a short, gnarly-looking guy, but apparently he had this unbelievably beautiful wife. I've never seen her picture, but everybody kept asking him, how did an ugly guy like you wind up with such a beautiful wife? And it's a funny thing. People think I'm Yogi Berra.
Oh, goodness. So, Phil, I think that's a perfect segue for you to tell us, how did you and Peter meet, and what's a little bit about your story so that our BrainWise friends can connect with that. And then we'll go into a little bit of Peter's life story and go through the risk part of it, because it sounds like that's a big theme from Peter's perspective as he's gone along his life journey.
I would say that risk and humor are 2 of the through lines. I moved to North Carolina with Kathy, my wife, about 8 years ago. And within a couple of months, we realized that we needed some social life. So we joined a local wine club, and voila, there was Peter and Karen. So there's another through line for the 2 of us, and that is wine. There is rarely a time when Peter and I don't get together, and there's too many negatives in there. We always have wine when we get together. So known Peter, and one of the things I've found about knowing Peter over the last 8 years, he's probably one of the smartest Renaissance men that I've ever met in my life. And it's a joy to be around him. It's a joy to know him. And yeah, I think as you get to know his brain, it is one of the most amazing brains on the planet.
And I wish I knew that.
Positive or negative.
Where is that guy? Yeah. Thank you, Phil. And Phil, Cole, as you can probably tell, Phil is very much of that ilk, and we have a wonderful time talking to one another. And I think that what compels us to communicate as deeply as we do is the desire to remain as genuine as possible with one another in all ways. So we tease one another. We obviously pour a lot of wine for one another, but in the end, we can look one another in the eye, and we know that there's no BS. And if you have a relationship like that with anyone in your life, it's one of the most valuable things you can ever stumble upon. So we have that.
That's beautiful.
Very
It's
lucky.
beautiful, especially in today's world where it seems like, especially with social media, everyone puts on this kind of facade. being able to remove that and really know that you have an authentic relationship is so critical.
Yeah.
And so, Peter, you've lived a remarkably varied life just from the brief conversation that we've had, preparing for our discussion today, from Buffalo to the operating room, technology, farming, even whiskey making. Give us kind of the short flyover. And when you look back, what connects all of those chapters?
When you grow up in Buffalo, New York, in an era when it was deemed to be the neglected Rust Belt of America, your expectations are very slim. But what that does, it opens up a whole plateau of opportunity for you to be your own person. You don't have to be a distinguished New Yorker or a snazzy Californian or anything. You can just be you. And in the attempt to become, you wind up asking questions a lot more often about which direction you might want to take. You might want to take this completely free self of yours that you were blessed with your upbringing. And of course, I originally was enamored of science, and I went into scientific studies that led me into medical school. And then because I had a lot of interest in hand-eye coordination, I wound up becoming a surgeon and studied general surgery and then became a plastic surgeon. But I also went to Harvard and did a postdoc in platelet physiology, of all things. I was very interested in the blood clotting, and it was just a passion of mine. After 10 years of practicing surgery and running a laboratory, generating a lot of scientific papers, and I had a phenomenal career going, but I realized that life is short. You only get so many life units, and I wanted to experience the rest of life. So at the peak of my career, right after I got tenure at a university, I just resigned outright with no money coming in and founded a biotech company and ran it with no business experience for 5 years, got my behind kicked by every good business person in the world, it seemed, until we finally sold it. And we moved to North Carolina with the sale, stayed with the company I sold it to for a year. Wasn't a good fit. So with 3 children in high school, my wife not working, I came home one night and told her my wife I had just resigned from this job that we had moved for. And she said to me, this is a woman who saw me actually voluntarily leave a phenomenal career in plastic surgery. She sat down with a glass of wine, said to me, the only problem with you doing this again this time is that the period of sheer fright and hysteria is only going to last about a month, and we're not going to have time to enjoy it. That was my message, that I better damn well get a consulting job, a consulting business going by the next morning, or she was going to kill me. And so I did. And I ran a solo consulting firm for 5 years before I wound up joining a Fortune 500 company and running medical research for them for a while, and spent my last years before retirement in biotech companies at one executive level or another. But about 10 years ago, on a whim, we bought a 40-acre farm of Oxford, North Carolina, where Phil and his wife were living. That's why we wound up meeting in Oxford. And I became a barley farmer just because I didn't want the land to just lie there. So I wound up building a barn and bought 2 tractors and put up a silo and learned how to farm the land. And it was funny because we were at the restaurant we founded a couple of days ago, and all my bags of barley are sitting there waiting to be distilled. A bunch of them have already been turned into a single malt whiskey in barrels. And there is a remnant of that time that we spent farming. But after about 10 years, my wife looked me in the eye and she said, "You're an idiot. We got to get out of here. This is way too much work for 2 people of our age." And I said, "Yeah, but I like it. I like it." She said, "I don't care. We're moving back to North Raleigh." And it was done. It was one of these. That's it. So we wound up moving back to a beautiful home in North Raleigh, and I'm completely happy. So that's my story.
I love it. It sounds like there was a lot of risk taking along the journey to get to the end destination, and obviously a lot of fun experiences along the way too. And the last time we spoke, you said that risk is the only legal acting performance enhancing drug that we have. Can you tell us what you mean by that?
It's the mantra that, and I've said this to people 1,000 times, that risk is the only legal, long-acting, performance-enhancing drug we have. If you think about it, if you take amphetamines, you get a momentary high, but it's not long-acting. And they're also not legal unless you've been prescribed such drugs. The only thing that can jack up your emotions for a long period of time is risk. And what people don't understand, so many people are risk averse in life, and they wind up living lives that are cloistered and that prevent them from reaching the tendrils of themselves out to other things to experience them, because they're afraid that they're either afraid of failure or afraid of something. But my sense of it is that risk gives you unlimited opportunity. Now, I'm not talking about doing drugs or contract killing or anything like those kinds of risks. But measured risk gives you a couple of things. One, it opens up opportunities that you otherwise might never have had. But the second thing is that once you have taken the risk and have conquered the thing that you took the risk for, it grows. It's the only method by which you can actually ratchet your life into greater value. And the other thing about it is, let's say you take a risk and it doesn't go well. You blow it as a consequence of taking the risk. Cognitive dissonance theory prevents you from ever thinking that you made a wrong decision anyway. So you're totally protected. Even if you take risk, you're totally protected from thinking you're a buffoon, because you're going to have a bad outcome and you go, what a learning experience that was. And you move on and you actually wind up doing better. So you guys are probably not familiar with this because you're not of a medical background, but there's a rule of heart function called the Starling curve of the heart. In your heart, depending upon how much blood fills your heart, the heart accommodates it and pumps harder until you go into heart failure. And the Starling curve is like this bell curve, typical bell curve sort of situation. I think risk is the same as the Starling curve. The more risk you take up to a point, the better you do. After that, you begin to fail a lot more often. So the key, if you're going to be a risk taker, is figure out where the peak of the curve is and don't go too far beyond it.
Yeah, no, it makes total sense. You've also talked, Peter, about being a portfolio developer rather than just a unitary perfectionist. What does that mean, and how has that mindset shaped the choices you've made?
Yeah, I'm a real believer in this. Take a Tom Brady or a Michael Jordan or Picasso or all of these people who are the kind of the unitary performers in life. And I'm not taking anything away from them. Obviously, to become that profound in your skill set is an achievement of no unworthy note. But I think most people are never going to achieve that kind of brilliance in one sector. And they're probably going to find that they are better off developing skills to their optima in multiple areas, which we would maybe call the portfolio. And a really good example of this was in the Atlantic magazine about 25, 30 years ago, when the F-16 was first being developed by Grumman Aeronautical. At the time, another aircraft company was developing an alternative fighter jet that the cost of it was about 40% less than the F-16. The maintenance costs, the number of people needed to maintain the plane, was about a half of the number of people needed to maintain the plane. It was an incredible creation. It was just an amazing fighter. The only difference between the two was that the fighter flew about 5 miles per hour slower than the top speed of the F-16. And the Air Force chose the F-16 despite all of the cost, because the last 5% of performance was worth the billions of dollars that they needed. Now, if you decide that you want to become Michael Jordan in any one sector of your life, what you have to realize is you probably have to give as much to it as the original 95% of your effort. To me, a better way to play your game. You have limited life units, right? You have a limited game to play as a human being. To me, the better way to play it is explore those skills you have and take every one of them to the 95% limit as much as you can. But don't go for the extra 5%, because you're going to prevent yourself from exploring all the other skills. And that's what I think makes life really interesting. It's the portfolio.
No, it sounds really interesting because we talk about portfolio a lot of times in business from a perspective of the portfolio of stores or whatever it is that you're managing, this group of individuals, or you've got your portfolio of work that you've done or whatever it is, or you've got a portfolio of investments. But in this case, it's a portfolio of skills, expertise, of experiences that kind of round out you as an individual. So I think it's a very unique perspective on what that means for us as within our own.
Let me go a little deeper on this kind of the portfolio idea. So when I was practicing plastic surgery, I founded and ran the facial nerve center at the University of Pittsburgh. So I became a faceologist, if you will. And I actually, if you search the patent registry, I have a patent on measuring facial motion. It's just kind of weird in its own way. But what I learned by focusing my career on that for some significant period of time was that there are only about 40 or so what they call visages. Visage in French means face, right? There are only 40 or so general face types, and everything else is Mr. and Mrs. Potato Head. It's a little bit of eye difference, a little bit of forehead difference. And you'll know this because if you stand at a bus stop and you watch people getting off the bus and you look at every person coming off and you really concentrate, every one of them will remind you of someone else. because there are only 40 face types and they will convey that to you. So then I took a finance course at the University of Michigan, an MBA finance course, and I learned that in finance, to build a portfolio that's a balanced portfolio that's almost bomb-proof, you only need 36 or 40 matched pairs of stocks that behave completely opposite to one another. Okay, so there's another 40-ish type of portfolio out there. But the third 40-ish portfolio is that there are only 40 or so stories in life. Romeo and Juliet gets told over and over many times in different ways, but it's only one of 40 stories. Bad divorce, another one. High risk, another one. But it's interesting that there's something about that kind of quatrain number that resonates throughout our lives. I think if you're an individual and you develop 40 skills, you're probably about as balanced a person as you can be.
And one thing that went through my mind as you were describing it is, are you telling Phil and I that we have a potato head? That's what I'm picking up on. And Phil, I am not going to claim the potato head notion. I'll let you own that.
Yeah, well,
you got it.
In your case, guys, I'd say you have sweet potato heads. Okay.
Oh, perfect.
You're good. You're just fine.
As long as it's not a purple potato head.
Exactly.
But you know what? After I've told you this, you watch. You'll stop or someplace tomorrow. I'll look and you go, man, Johnson was right. These people all look like Mr. and Mrs. Potato Head to me.
You're giving our BrainWise friends free license to assume that others have a potato head. So I love it. Oh, God.
If this goes viral, we're all in trouble.
Oh, goodness. It might be the reason it goes viral, quite honestly.
It could be.
One of the themes that I heard you also just talking about was it sounds there's a lot of curiosity for you in things and wanting to understand things and how they work. And you described the curiosity as an enzyme or the force that allows improbable pairings to become something new. How does curiosity help you process risk, especially when you face the unknown?
Oh, first of all, I attribute my curiosity to my mother, who told me, don't ask me any questions, just look everything up. And I did. She didn't say it quite like that, but she taught me that the discipline of pursuing knowledge was a very important discipline. But I'm retired, right? So I'm just a big, fat old slug at this point. And so what I spend my time doing are seemingly meaningless tasks like building cutting boards for people or tables for my wife or things like that. But every Monday, I have a group of guys. I'm a radio control airplane flyer and builder, and my dad taught me how to build these wood airplanes from when I was a kid. And in today's world, people are tending to buy airplanes that are already made. And so I wanted to make sure that the tradition of building these things went on. And so I encouraged about 6 or 7 guys to come together in the club, and they all meet at my house on Mondays, and we all rotate lunch, and then we go in and we build. Everybody builds in my workshop for a few hours until I open up a bottle of wine, and then everybody slows down a bit. And then we go into what we call the salle de cerveau in French, meaning the brain room, and we BS with each other for another 45 minutes before I tell them, well, I got to go in and fight with my wife now, and then they all go home. But yesterday, we had a guy who had an old kit that he was building, and a lot of these guys are new builders, and they haven't had all the experiences that I've had, but he was building it, and all of a sudden he realized he had the plans for his wing, but he didn't have any plans for the fuselage. And this is an old, like 35-year-old kid. And somehow the plan was gone. And he came in and he was all upset because I don't have any plans for the fuselage. He goes, you didn't take them, did you? You didn't roll them up and burn them or anything, did you? So he was looking at me like I'm like the bad guy because he left his kit there. I somehow absconded with his plan. I said, no, take a look at my rolled up plans. None of them were there. He clearly had a plan a plane that didn't have the plans. And so he was going elliptical on me. And I looked at the guy and I just said, all right, now we're going to get curious. And he said, what do you mean? I said, now we're going to go find those plans in a totally different place. And he said, where are we going to find them? So I went on ChatGPT. I typed in the exact name of his airplane. I go, where the hell can I find this plan for the fuselage? And in 2 seconds, it came up. In 2 seconds more, I had the picture. In 2 seconds more, I had it printed. And then I said to him, all right, now you got an 8.5 by 11 picture of your airplane, but you need a full set of plans. How are you going to create it? He said, I don't know. I said, do you have the plastic cowl in your kit? The plastic cowl for your airplane? He said, yeah. I said, measure the length of it and then multiply the whole rest of the damn thing by that, and you'll have your full blueprint. And he looked at me like, wow, curiosity will get you somewhere. I think that the bottom line, we obviously gave him a ration of you-know-what just for thinking the way he was. But the message there is that no matter how dire a situation seems, if you're curious, you can crawl your way out of it. And Phil, you and I have just done this with our distillery, looking at various approaches that we can take. Even when you think you're up against a brick wall, you just have to turn on that curiosity gene and new avenues open up for you.
And what I was saying, observing Peter, is that curiosity is at every level. It's at the sort of almost the societal level of what's going on and how to be curious at that. But also, Peter said to me several times, when you're reading a book, if you come across a word you don't know, you don't let that go by. You go and research what that word is. So it's at the macro level and the micro level.
Cole, as you can probably tell by just talking to me, that when I'm reading a book and I come across a word that I don't know, that happens like 500 times on every page.
Yeah, I'm sure.
Yeah. He's past he doesn't have to look up in the anymore. But
Right.
Love trips me up from time to time.
I think it's a perfect transition or kind of setup where we want to take the conversation next, because taking the leap doesn't always come easy. And so we're going to explore with more of your story what happens when fear shows up at the edge of change, because it's really what is happening here is that there's a fear, there's something that's happening, but we're probably on the precipice of change. And if we just are able to move forward, then we'll be able to see that happen. So take us on one of the biggest leaps in your life, leaving plastic surgery and academia to move into technology. What did fear sound like for you in that moment, and what made you take the leap anyway?
That's interesting. I'm trying to think about the biggest thing. Leaving plastic surgery was, at the time I left plastic surgery, I was the chairperson of the Plastic Surgery Research Council, which is one of the most honorable positions in the entire profession for a young plastic surgeon. And my colleagues, all of whom were very capable surgical researchers, kind of looked at me like, you become a drug addict or an alcoholic, or what the hell's the matter with you? But what had happened was about 3 or 4 years before, I was a victim of my own success. My laboratory was producing an enormous amount of research, and we were publishing papers and being invited here and there to give presentations. And I started at a very young age to be picked on to become chairman of plastic surgery departments. Case Western Reserve actually offered me the chairmanship of plastic surgery when I was, I think, 37 or 38. And I'm not the kind of person who should be the chairman of a department of surgery, because you have to be a tough, gristled person to deal with other surgeons all the time like that. I was much more of a lover, not a fighter, but I knew that of myself. And I was able instead to convert the opportunity into half of my time off paid for with the vice chancellor at the University of Pittsburgh to build what was known then as the Pittsburgh Tissue Engineering Initiative, which was the original kind of multi-institutional foray into what we now call regenerative medicine. And I united all of the different universities in Pittsburgh and was playing a very prominent role in that city doing this. And as time went by, I was doing less and less surgery. And all of a sudden it became clear to me that I was becoming a burden to my other surgeons because they were paying part of my salary, but I wasn't really making enough. I had to do the honorable thing and take a risk and step away. So it was almost like the frog in boiling water. The water was getting warmer, and I wasn't really recognizing it until finally it got to the point where it was boiling and I needed to do something different. And fortunately, I had an idea for a company that caught on with a lot of other people, and I was able to jump out and become the CEO of this biotech company that I founded, which never made a lot of money or anything, but it was a really cool idea. And we worked at it for about 5 years before I sold it to a company in North Carolina. In a way, despite the fact that it was, even today, people in plastic surgery come up to me and they go, I can't believe nobody voluntarily leaves a profitable, successful career in plastic surgery. Nobody does that. Why did you do that? I go, I wanted to see what the other side was like. So even though it was a big risk, I also knew that I was going to expose myself to learn how to become a business person, to learn how to do a variety of different things. And something, like I said earlier, cognitive dissonance theory prevents you from ever thinking you made a bad decision. I look back at my life, I go, hell, that was a great decision. Because look at everything that happened as a result of that. So I think your question is, how do you handle the fear of a risk jump? I think my wife, who's not a big risk taker, but oddly enough, very tolerant of my risk taking, probably had the best statement of all. And she said, the period of sheer fright and hysteria is only going to last about a month. We won't even have time to enjoy it. She understood that it was like a ping pong ball in the ocean. You're going to float. If you have skill, you're going to float back to the top anyway. So it doesn't matter.
Right.
Maybe you wind up in Malta and not Spain, but you wind up somewhere and you'll do it.
And you did something similar again with your consulting firm and I think it's called Selix. Please forgive me if I got the pronunciation wrong, but where you resigned from a job and then went to forming a company overnight. What happened in those 24 hours and how did action help you move through that uncertainty?
So anyway, I don't know if I told you this when we first met, but you know where the name Selix comes from?
I do not. I remember you telling me, but I have forgotten.
Phil, did I ever tell you what it comes?
You did, but it's worth explaining for our listeners.
Yeah. So Selix is a GOW word. Cole, do you know what a GOW word is?
No.
It's a word come up when you're drinking a glass of wine.
Oh, okay. Very good.
Yeah. My wife had just told me, I just resigned from this job after we moved our family to North Carolina. The kids are in school. She's not working. We're not wealthy. We have limited resources. And she pours me a glass of wine. She said, the problem with you doing this time is a period of sheer fright and hysteria is only going to last for a month and we won't even have time to enjoy it. But then she looked at me and she said, okay, so what are you going to do? I said, I'm going to form a company that is whose name combines 4 words: science, intelligence, complexity, and simplicity. And that's where Selix came from. Now, a friend of mine over the years said to me, I love the name of your company because it reminds me of Skinflix. And that was when I realized that I had made a very good choice.
Right.
But anyway, I wound up originally positioned it to become I had noticed problems with internal communications in company. And I originally positioned it to be a communications development company. And I actually, Phil, you don't know this, but I actually wrote some articles that I should share with you that delve into this. But as time went by, I realized that the greater value that I could bring was in supporting biomedical development at a variety of levels because I really understood the technology and all of that. So I wound up becoming a biomedical consultant. And then I was picked off to run research and medical affairs for a Fortune 500 company. And I did that for 5 years. Then I founded and co-ran another company that provided what we call chief medical officer services to companies for 5 years. Then I ran a stem cell biology company for a few years and then retired, and now I'm chairman of that company. But that was how my career unfolded.
Wow. I mean, it truly is amazing. I think that one of the things that is also a theme that comes through is your persistence, because it takes persistence in all of those activities to be as successful as you are. And you were just sharing not too long ago that you were, I think, at 1,108 days straight on Duolingo teaching yourself or going through being able to teach yourself French. And then you also retaught yourself calculus, always mastering new skills. So what keeps you going or what gives you your persistence when the excitement fades and things might get challenging?
A nap.
I love it. A good nap.
I'm not kidding. I know if I'm cruising along on any point in the day and all of a sudden I'm not interested, I know it's time for me just to take a nap. It's like a battery. You got to get charged up again. So if I take a nap, 20 minutes, and I can, because I'm a surgeon, I can sleep anywhere in any position, upside down, backwards for 20 minutes and be completely restored after 20 minutes. So I understand the power of napping is enormous if you really can do that. Like a lot of people tell me, I can never take a nap in the afternoon. I look at them like, are you kidding me? I can take a nap right now talking to you if I want to.
He often does with me.
Yeah. But to me, the key to enthusiasm is to be as fully charged as you can be. I did teach medical consulting to MBA students at UNC for about 5 years. And one of the lectures I gave was, how do you fill a day completely? The way you fill a day completely is you look at all of the appointments that you have to fulfill, the phone calls or whatever you need, and you block those out. Then you look at all the other time slots, the tasks that you want to get done. A lot of people say you should only do the tasks that are the most important first, because then you'll obviously get them taken care of. I completely disagree with that. My feeling about it is do the things first that are most appealing to you, that fit within the time slots available. Because what you do is you diffuse the potential for making work fulfill the time allotted to the task. And you wind up getting all of these things done. The stuff that you don't really want to do that's really critically important, as you come to the end of your day and you have a limited amount of time left, it gets really interesting to get those done because you want to fulfill your to-do list. I learned early about time management and how you can pack as much into a day. Because remember, I've said this to you many times in this conversation, you only have so many life units.
Right.
You have to optimize the utilization of your life units, if not only to get things done, but also one of the criteria, I think, of enthusiasm is learning. And you've got to leverage those life units to allow you to look up those words, those 500 words on a page that you're missing in your vocabulary. And then at the end of the day, you can look back and you've really achieved something.
And it's the persistence that you have to see things through really sets the stage for kind of the next part of the conversation that's going to round out the story today, which is, I think our listeners have probably heard some humor coming through. There's obviously a little bit of a legacy that is coming through in terms of what you want to leave behind and how you make it all mean something, which is definitely a theme of the conversation of the story I've heard so far. Let's start with humor. Humor seems to be a big part of who you are. You've got over 200 plus jokes recorded on a voice recorder. How has humor helped you cope with risk and change your life or change throughout your life?
So when I was in college, I took a course. Essentially, it was a course named Shakespeare. And so in that course, we read all of his major plays and really discussed the way that Shakespeare went about communicating his thoughts about the world to people through his plays. And our professor was a very interesting, tweedy dressed kind of guy who said the bottom of it all is the comparison between the comic character and the tragic character. And at that point, despite the fact that he was about as boring as he could be most of the time, we were all ears because we said, wow, if you can distill Shakespeare into that kind of a statement, I want to hear the rest. And then he goes, all right, and he puts one leg up on a stool and he looks at the room and he goes, tragic character, walks down a road, comes across a brick wall lying across the road, beats his head against it, runs against it, can't headway whatsoever, sits down and starts crying next to it and never makes any progress whatsoever. So then there was a long pause. He goes, the comic character is dancing along the road, comes to the brick wall. He sees the tragic character sitting down, crying by the edge of the wall, pushes against the wall gently, realizes it's a brick wall, pushes a little harder, realizes it's not going to move, walks over to where there's a little tree near the wall, urinates on the wall, jumps up into the tree, climbs up, jumps over the wall, and dances on and goes forward. And I thought to myself, that was worth all the tuition I paid for this one course. So humor is funny because humor can anger a lot of people if you impose humor at the wrong time. Humor at the right moment, though, is the elixir of life. Phil, you know this, when we go to the Snake House on Friday night and we inject humor into situations, that the difference is enormous in the way that not only the servers deal with us, the way we deal with one another. It's such a very critical thing. And I don't know if you guys have ever read the book, The Act of Creation by Arthur Koestler. Phil, you have, I think, haven't you? Yeah. So Arthur Koestler and his wife, unfortunately, committed suicide together when they were older because of infirmities. But he was this brilliant, I believe, Hungarian who wrote this book called The Act of Creation. And it was all about humor and why humor is humor, about humor. And what it is that humor, it's very much like quantum theory. Quantum theory, of course, is all about energy states that go from one place to another tenfold higher place at multiple levels. And he said humor is that which happens when you cannot anticipate the ladder between those two states. When somebody tells you a joke, what makes it funny is you didn't anticipate what was happening. So humor is quantum. And if you realize that, it's very powerful. You can do a lot of things with humor if you know how to utilize it.
Yeah, for sure. And Phil and I, we certainly have talked about humor from a neuroscience perspective, and we always have a little bit of humor in every one of our episodes, in every conversation that Phil and I have, I think we end up leaving laughing. We might not start out that way sometimes, depending on what's going on, but we always end up leaving the conversation having a good laugh with one another.
Yeah, it's very critical. Phil and I have a lot. We understand one another very well, and we can actually behave a little out of bounds with one another because we know that we're going to induce a state of humor. It's very rare that you get to that level with other people. But boy, if you do, it's just evident.
I can only imagine the types of jokes and conversation that happens between the two of you, and we'll leave that for private discussion. But I am sure it's riveting.
Yeah. I'll tell you, Cole, I have, like Phil said, I have my wife and my kids, like the typical dad stuff. They hate when dad tries to tell jokes. The dad joke thing is very much alive, right? But I know they're funny. So I just record them all. I have 200 voice recordings of all these jokes. And I have it all set up so that if I'm lucky enough to know when I'm going to die, they're all going to go on memory sticks and they're all going to get FedEx to all members of my family. And they're going to get all these jokes and they're going to have to listen to them. So I'll tell you what, Cole, I'll put you on that list. All right.
Perfect. I love it. I'll add it to my mom. Said she's a very dry sense of humor. She sends me all these memes and dry, like Maxine jokes and all these other ones on my text messages. So I'll add it to those.
And you've heard people who say, I can never remember jokes. Peter has the corollary to that.
I love it. He's going to provide us with an endless supply.
Yeah. But unfortunately, yes.
And you're also an artist, which I think is interesting. When you add all of these things in that kind of make up who you are, there is no doubt that curiosity, risk-taking, all of the adjectives we used to describe you are coming through. But then adding on artist, because you create digital pieces linking moments in history to abstract images. You also were mentioning that you do things with woodworking, which is also art in and of itself. So what role does creativity play in how you process your experiences?
So we have 3 golden retrievers, and we only have 3 golden retrievers because my wife, Karen, is so adored by animals that she cannot have fewer, because the amount of adoration that they laud upon her daily probably is a trophic factor for her whole existence. But what it does mean is that we need to take them on walks periodically. She'll take 2 and I'll take the older one. And as we go on walks, they stop in unpredictable places and will urinate. And it's funny because they don't completely urinate. They just urinate a little bit because they want to have enough left to mark the next spot that they're interested in. And I think my artwork and my woodworking is me urinating to mark my place in the universe.
I would have never thought about it that way. Very interesting.
You're around me and you see a framed piece of artwork and you smell urine. I've been there.
I was just going to say, doesn't Phil have a piece hanging in his house? Phil, you might have to go check it for smells.
Yeah,
I will be doing that immediately we're done.
You know, I actually have published 3 books of cartoons, one about restaurant humor, one about human resources, and one about plastic surgery, one about general surgery. But if you go on my website, that www.sintelix.com, not Skinflix, Sintelix, okay, you will find a whole section called Me and My Doctor. So I have this doctor who's an Indian woman, very astute, who every time I go to see her, she looks me in the eye and she goes, "What are you going to lie to me about today?" And so I have about 130 cartoons. They're very roughly drawn, quick drawings of her demeaning me in multiple ways. And I want you to take a look at it because to me, that's my, and I actually have made a book for her and given it to her. And she looked at it. She goes, "Are you kidding me?" I go, "No, this is how I feel every time I come to see you." But for me, it's a release. It gives you the ability to say, for a long time when I got into digital art, I'm a watercolorist by background, but when I got into digital art, I was so enamored of it that every day I was painting 5 or 6 paintings. I'm not doing so much of that lately. I'm doing much more writing lately. I think you go through phases of creativity. And so,
Well, no doubt.
Yeah, but to me, it's marking my territory is what I'm really doing.
I love it. We're speaking figuratively for our BrainWise listeners. If you do art, don't go start urinating on things. but it can be a way for you to certainly express yourself and leave your mark, which I think is,
I think I probably just avoided any potential sale of my artwork for the rest of my life.
especially when we get back on and Phil confirms or denies what his painting smells like.
That's right.
Well, to wrap things up for our listeners that are diligently listening to this episode, some of them may be standing at the edge of their own risk. They're facing a transition, a dream, or a risk that they've been putting off. What's your best advice for taking the first step?
Do it. Just do it. You cannot, we were talking about curiosity as an enzyme, right? And that leads you to all of these different things. I know of no enzyme that allays the feeling of fear that goes along with risk. Yeah, actually, I'll take that back. On 2 occasions, I found the enzyme that allays the fear that goes along with risk. Do we have enough time for me to tell you 2 quick stories? Okay, the first was when we bought a farm and I grew barley and I'm all proud of it. Had a farmer come with a combine and he grabbed the barley from my field and I had put up a 25-foot high silo with a big hole in the top with a cover, a conveyor belt up, and they dropped the barley in and it was stored the barley and they all left. And I'm standing there looking at the silo and it was going to start to rain shortly. And I realized that the sliding door on the top of the silo was still open.
Mm.
And I thought, I think I mentioned to you earlier in the conversation that despite the fact that I'm very fluent in risk taking, I'm extraordinarily acrophobic and claustrophobic. You go figure that one out. But anyway, I'm looking up at this 25 feet high. There's a ladder, of course, that goes up to the top. And I go, wow, who's going to close that thing? There's nobody around. I said, Karen, I can't get my wife to do that. It's like nuts. I looked at it. I think, okay, I know what I can do. Went inside. I found a bottle of Cabernet Sauvignon. I got an 8-ounce glass. I filled it. I drank it. And then I filled it again and I drank it again. And then I walked out and I go, I'm ready. I climbed the silo. I was like a jackalope running up the side of that silo. I closed the lid. I came back down. I came in to see Karen with a big smile on my face. She goes, where were you? I said, I was just on top of the silo closing the door. She said, I thought you were afraid of heights. I said, not today.
Which, by the way, we're not recommending you do that at home, BrainWise friends.
Right. That was my cure for momentary acrophobia. Let me tell you my cure for momentary claustrophobia. Phil has been in our farm. We're in the process of trying to sell our farm, which is another story. But we had a giant solarium in the farm where we all spent our time. And Phil, I don't know if you ever realized it, but in the early days in the solarium, if you walked across a certain part of the floor, it creaked a little bit. So it was clear that it wasn't as well supported as it really needed to be. So I did a bunch of research and I realized that you can buy these floor jacks that you can put underneath the floor and put a couple of boards underneath and crank it up and you take that problem away. But what it means is that you have to go into the crawl space of the building. And this is like 100 feet away from where the crawl space entrance was, because the crawl space, Phil, was way at the back end of the house. And I had to go almost to the coach house end of the house to be able to put this thing in. Fortunately, the crawl space was about 3 feet high. So it wasn't like you were in like 1 foot crawl, but it was still no place you want to be if you're claustrophobic. So it was about 9 o'clock in the morning. And my wife said to me, why are you opening up a bottle of red wine at 9 o'clock in the morning? I said, because I'm going to go fix the floor. And I literally did the same. I don't know if I had 2 8-ounce glasses, but I had 2 6-ounce glasses of Cabernet Sauvignon, sat down for a few minutes to let it take full effect. And then I went down. I was singing in the crawl space as I put this jack up. I came out, big smile on my face. She looks at me. It's 10 o'clock in the morning. She goes, why don't you just go finish the bottle?
Yeah, exactly. Oh, it's the juice of courage is what it is.
Yeah, I think actually we've got another opportunity here, and that is we'll have Karen on as a guest.
To come back to your original question, Cole, I think although liquid courage will help you under certain circumstances, it's certainly not the antidote for major career risk changes. I think the thing that it might become enzymatic is that realization that cognitive dissonance theory will prevent you from ever thinking you made a bad decision. If you just think about that. And also, if you think about the fact that, yeah, you leave a career in plastic surgery after all that training and you've been lauded for your capabilities and then you give it all away, what do you have to look forward to Well, here's what you have to look forward to. You can now create yourself. You only get one life. You get to create a whole other life. And if you look at it that way, then risk becomes really valuable to do.
Right. No, I think I think it truthfully is a beautiful story. And thank you for taking the time to share your story with honesty and grit and a little bit of humor peppered throughout, because I think there's certainly a lot of good tips and nuggets that people are going to listen to and go, okay, I'm in a position, especially today when we're in this very interesting space as a country, as a society, all the things that are happening. There are people that are having risk forced upon them, or that they're being able to make a choice and allowing them or giving them the opportunity to hear some of this information to maybe encourage them to take the risk. Because the other thing that we often talk about is what happens if you don't do it.
Yeah, you wind up becoming dull and rutted. And at the end of your life, you look back and you go, what the hell did I spend my life doing? Last thing I want to share with you, there was a guy who was the dean of the business school at Pitt when I was there, who had a very interesting take on entrepreneurship. And he said, people, I don't think I totally agree with him, but there's an element of truth in it. He goes, people only become entrepreneurs when they have no other choice. And in a way, risk taking, if you find yourself in a corner, sometimes that's when you create Microsoft. And so you don't underestimate your potential for having impact, despite the fact that you seem to be out of options, because you're never really out of options.
Yeah, for sure.
Yeah. Hey, this was great, guys.
Yeah. Thanks for joining us.
Yeah, thank you. It's not obviously the best way to spend time with a former surgeon, because our egos are already big enough without you guys intervening in this fashion, but it was a nice opportunity to go over things that matter. So I thank you.
No, absolutely. Thanks for sharing. It was awesome. There was a lot of really cool things we'll be able to share with our, what we call BrainWise friends. So thank you so much for joining us today. What a great conversation we had with Peter Johnson, Phil, and myself today. We hope you really took something away from this related to curiosity, risk tolerance, and applied some of the behavioral science or neuroscience principles we've talked about in many of our episodes in season 1 and now beginning in season 2. So we hope that you are able to take some of these things, apply them to your own life, find some continuity in things you might be wanting to do. And if you enjoyed today's show, like, comment, subscribe, rate, review, and most importantly, share this with a friend, family member, or colleague so they too can begin to live a BrainWise journey. And until next time, stay curious, stay compassionate, and always stay BrainWise.